Hey, welcome to Evergreen Perspective. I'm your host, Ben Chrisley. Today we're diving into something that touches almost every part of your life, whether you realize it or not. We're talking about your credit score. It's that three-digit number, that mysterious three-digit number that somehow decides, if you can rent an apartment, if you can buy a car, if you can get that mortgage, if you can open that business, sometimes even if you can get a job. We're told it's a measure of trust, a sign of financial responsibility. But what if I told you that's not really the full story? What if the credit system wasn't built to help you at all, but primarily to judge you? What if avoiding debt actually hurts your score? What if making a single mistake or just being poor can cost you opportunities for years? And here's the big one that's always been kind of weird to me is why is this private company, allowed to secretly decide your financial fate? In this episode, we're going to walk through the history of credit scoring, how it started, who it was built for, and why it leaves millions of Americans behind. We're going to break down how the system works, who it benefits, what's broken, and what we could maybe do to fix this system. Because, at the end of the day, your credit score doesn't define your worth, but it sure can limit the opportunities you get in life. So, we're going to talk about how things might need to change. So this is Evergreen Perspective, and we're just getting started. So I want to take a look back to the beginning when credit started. But before we do that, let's bring in Kate for Kate's Civic Corner.
Thanks, Ben. Hey, folks. Kate here with the Civic Corner, taking a minute to highlight some opportunities to get involved here in Southwest Washington. If you don't live in this area, get online when you have a few minutes and do a little digging. I'm sure you'll find some interesting events and organizations near you. As always, we'll put a link in the show notes for each of the events that we highlight here, where you can find more information, including what to expect and how to sign up. Coming up on June 6th at 6 p.m., the Clark County Republicans will be hosting a Get Acquainted gathering at Quartz Mountain Distillers in Vancouver. And Battleground will be holding their school board meeting at 4 p.m. on June 9th at the Louisville campus in Battleground. And in a few weeks, on June 14th, the Clark County Democrats will be holding their annual Ogden Dinner at the Hilton in Vancouver. This year's keynote speaker will be Governor Bob Ferguson. The silent auction starts at 5 p.m. with dinner at 6 p.m. And this is an event you'll need to get tickets ahead of time for, so go ahead and get online if you're interested in that and order your tickets. Okay, and now for this week's volunteer opportunity. Martha's Pantry in Vancouver is an organization serving those living with HIV and AIDS in Southwest Washington. Their focus is improving quality of life by providing food, hygiene products, clothing, and more, all donated by folks like us in the community. Check out the link for ways to contribute. That's it for today. If there's an event in Southwest Washington that you'd like us to feature here on Evergreen Perspective, please put it in the comments or send us an email. This is Kate with Kate's Civic Corner, encouraging you to get out there and get involved. Now back to Ben.
Thanks, Kate. Before credit cards, before scores, before we needed to get a number to buy an apartment or buy a car, there was still credit, but it looked a lot different than it does today. In the early 1900s, if you wanted to buy something on credit, it wasn't about numbers, it was about who you were, or more specifically, how that store owner felt about you. You'd walk into your local shop to buy some furniture or sewing machine or whatever, and the owner might say yes or no. They weren't looking at any standardized report. They were looking at you, your skin color, your clothes, your last name, whether you seem trustworthy. If you were church going, they might give your pastor a call, or they might give your boss a call and see what type of person you are. It was completely subjective. It was inconsistent and deeply discriminatory. By the 1930s, as more Americans relied on installment plans, and loans to buy anything from radios to refrigerators, businesses started keeping records. Not public records, but private ones. Just a Rolodex style, files on each customer. Some merchants banded together at the time, and they called themselves a credit bureau. the early version of today's credit reporting agencies. But these bureaus weren't run by a government or a public institution. They were private companies sharing information with pretty much no oversight. And the information they collected, it wasn't just about money. Right? Many of these early credit files included gossip, personal rumors, marital status, even whether someone had good morals or came from the right kind of family. Some companies literally labeled people with codes like undesirable or drinker or colored. If that sounds outrageous, it's because it is. It was. But it was also legal at the time. By the 1950s, as computers entered the scene, companies started looking for ways to standardize all this data. That's when a company called Fair, Isaac and Company, now known as FICO, stepped in. In 1956, they developed one of the first computerized credit scoring systems. It was based on algorithms that analyzed a consumer's past behavior to predict their future risk. This was meant to make credit decisions more objective. But, here's where the problem comes in. They were building on the top of a system that was built on decades of biased data already. So all those inequities of the past, they didn't just go away. They just got digitized. Then came the big shift, right? From the 1950s through the 1980s, a lot changed, and not necessarily for the better. Local credit bureaus, once small and fragmented, began to, consolidate into massive for-profit corporations. We know them today: Equifax, Experian, TransUnion. These companies digitized credit records and quietly began collecting massive amounts of personal data on people, often without people's knowledge or consent. And so in 1970, the Fair Credit Reporting Act became the first major law to regulate this industry. It gave consumers the right to see their credit report and dispute errors that were on there, but those rights were difficult to exercise, and the enforcement behind that was very weak. Then in 1974, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act made it illegal to deny credit based on race, sex, or marital status. For the first time, women could apply for credit without needing a husband's co-signature. Think about that. It was progress, but not justice, because the underlying data still carried decades of bias, and lenders could still discriminate by using proxies like zip codes, job titles, or income levels. Meanwhile, credit cards were exploding in popularity, right? Visa and MasterCard went national, debt became mainstream, and behind the scenes, banks and lenders began building their own secret scoring models to decide who got what and at what rate they got it. A foundation of private control, right? Racial and gender bias, inconsistent data, and zero public accountability. So by the time FICO released its first standardized score in 1989, the foundation had already been laid, right? And that's the model we're still living under today. So in 1989, FICO rolled out the score most of us know now, right? The FICO score. It ranges from 300 to 850 and quietly determines whether you get approved for credit cards, a mortgage, a car, a job, or the apartment. It's been promoted as a neutral mathematical model, but in reality, it was one still based on one thing, and that's debt. The FICO score doesn't care how much you earn. It doesn't care if you pay your rent on time. It doesn't care if you have zero debt and live within your means. It rewards borrowing, not responsibility. And it punishes people who can't or don't want to take on debt. That's the system we've inherited, a system born from racism, secrecy, and private interest, one that evolved into this number gatekeeper for modern life. Nobody ever voted that into, office or whatever. No one elected FICO. No one ever asked how we'd like our trustworthiness measured. But here we are, being judged by a number that most of us didn't even know existed until, you were denied the ability to buy something or to get something you needed. The credit score became this power. And, power rarely arrives without some type of bias, right? It was designed to protect lenders, not the borrowers. And for decades, whether through outdated policies or high-tech discrimination, it's worked exactly as it was intended. So, let's talk about redlining. If you've listened to this podcast before, we've talked about redlining several times. You know, in the 1930s, the federal government, in collaboration with banks and real estate agents, created residential security maps that color coded neighborhoods based on perceived investment risk. The term redlining comes from these maps. Neighborhoods were outlined in red, were deemed too risky for loans. And what made them too risky for loans, you might ask? It wasn't crime, it wasn't income, it was simply race. If black families lived there, or even if they might move there, that area was marked as red. And just like that, an entire community could be locked out of the American dream. Just like that. No home loans, no small business capital, no opportunity to gain generational wealth. And here's the kicker. Those redlined areas often fed directly into the early data used to shape the credit scoring system. So when FICO rolled out its objective model, it was already echoing decades and decades of systemic racism. A lower likelihood of home ownership, higher reliance on short-term loans, fewer financial institutions nearby. Those weren't just coincidences in these neighborhoods. They were the legacy of redlining and no investment into these areas. But it didn't stop there. Until 1974, a woman in America could be denied credit just for being a woman, especially if she wasn't married. Even after that, many women found themselves needing a husband's signature to apply for a mortgage or a credit card. Are you kidding me? I mean, this isn't that long ago, guys. The Equal Opportunity Act passed in 74 finally made it illegal to discriminate based on race, color, religion, national origin, sex, marital status, or age. But legislation didn't erase bias. It just made it easier to hide behind data, right? That data just didn't go away. It's still in there. And today, still reflects decades of unequal access. Black and Latino Americans are more likely to be credit invisible, meaning they don't have enough credit history to generate a score at all. They're also disproportionately represented in the lower credit tiers, even when incomes are similar. Why? Because the system rewards behavior that hasn't been equally accessible, right? Because if you want a high score, what do you need? You need a long credit history. You need multiple types of loans. You got to maintain low balance with high limits, right? But if you've avoided debt altogether, or if you don't want a credit card, if you live in a cash-based household, well, the system simply punishes you. That's not just backwards, it's exclusionary by design. And the consequences for everyday Americans are massive. We're not talking about just about loan approvals. Your credit score can determine a myriad of things, right? Whether you can rent an apartment, whether you can get into a decent auto rate, right? They always run your credit when you're applying for auto insurance. It can affect your rates, right? Whether you can finance a cell phone. We all need phones these days, right? Sometimes it can even determine whether you get a job, right? That's right. Employers in many states can check your credit report before hiring you. If they don't like what they see, tough luck, even if you've never missed a bill in your life. Now, companies will say they're not using the actual score. They're just looking at your report, but let's not kid ourselves, right? The report is built for a score, and the score is built for the lender, which means, once again, regular people are left navigating a maze of rules they never agreed to, rules that were never built for them. They weren't built for everyday hardworking Americans. So let's break down exactly how this system works and why the logic behind it falls apart once you begin just taking a little bit of a closer look at it. We already know it's built on shaky, discriminatory ground. We've established that. But how does it actually work, right? How does it really do its part? So your credit score, usually a FICO score, is a 3-digit number. We've talked about it, right? It falls between 300 and 850. Higher is better, they say, right? But what does that number even mean? Well, it's based on 5 categories. So number 1, your payment history. It comprises 35% of the score. It's the biggest chunk. And it makes sense, right? Have you paid your bills on time? But here's the problem. One late payment, even from years ago, can completely tank your score, right? It doesn't matter if your rent is always paid, your utilities are always on. It only counts if it's reported. And most of the time, those items aren't reported. So, number two, amounts owed. How much do you owe? 30%. This one's tricky. It's not just how much debt you have, it's how much of your credit you're using. So let's say you got a $1,000 limit on a credit card and you use $800. Even if you paid in full every month, the system will ding you for using too much of your credit. Right? And then number three, length of credit history. This counts for about 15% of your score. That means the older your accounts, helps your score. But if you're young or if you've avoided credit cards, too bad. You're punished for not borrowing money earlier in life. And we got number four, new credit. This one's ridiculous. Every time someone checks your credit to offer you a loan or credit card, your score takes a hit. Right? That's called a hard inquiry. Just asking for credit, even if you don't take it, makes you look risky. Think about that. You're penalized for shopping around or exploring your options. That doesn't make any sense. And number five, credit mix, right? 10% of the system likes it when you have all different types of credit. Credit cards, student loans, mortgages, auto loans, right? And so in other words, the system rewards you for being in multiple forms of debt. So what does all that tell us? It tells us that the credit system doesn't reward financial stability. It rewards managed debt. So if you're the type of person who always pays everything in cash, avoids loans, and lives within your means, you're invisible. Or worse, your score is low because you're not playing the game they want you to play. And make no mistake, it is a game, and it's a rigged one, right? With very convoluted rules. You need debt to build credit. You need credit to get decent interest rates. You need those interest rates to avoid more debt. It's a circle, and if you step out of it, the system will punish you. All right, and here's another kicker. If you finally pay off all your debt and say, close your accounts, say you want to be debt-free, you don't want to have these accounts, what happens? Your score drops, right? That's right, because being responsible can hurt you. Why? Because then the system sees you as less profitable. Right? Less profitable to the banks, less profitable to the lenders, less useful to the companies that the system was built for. It's built for them, not you. And it gets worse, right? If you make a mistake along the way, let's say you fall behind on payments because of a medical emergency, or you lose a job. Those hits to your credit score can follow you for 7 years, right? Or more. Meanwhile, if you're the bank that tanks the economy, well, you simply just get bailed out, right? Or if you're a payday lender charging 400% APR, you get to keep operating just fine. But if you're a working class person with a gap in your credit report, suddenly you're considered high risk. And guess what? High risk borrowers get charged higher interest, which makes it harder to pay off the debt, which keeps you stuck in the same place. It's not some kind of ladder you get to climb up. It's a treadmill. You're just going round and round. This isn't about teaching people financial literacy. This is about a financial system that rewards those who already have money and penalizes those who don't. So who really benefits from all this? Because, spoiler alert, it's not you, it's not me, it's not your family, it's not your community. Let's stop pretending that this system was built to help you. Because I think it's pretty obvious it wasn't. The modern credit scoring system, FICO, VantageScore, all of it, was designed first and foremost to protect lenders, not empower borrowers. Right? That 3-digit score you carry around like an invisible badge, it's not to your benefit. It exists to help banks access how risky you are and whether you'll make them money or not. It's not about financial wellness. It's about financial risk to them. And here's how it plays out a little bit. Credit card companies love the score because they use it to decide who gets offered the worst terms. Those pre-approved credit card offers that show up in your mailbox with, eye-watering interest rates. Those are targeted, not at the wealthy, not at the people with pristine scores necessarily. They're aimed at folks with a little bit lower scores, right? Working class Americans, people trying to get by, trying to make their way, because people with low or fair credit scores are more likely to carry a balance. And what happens if you carry a balance? You pay interest, lots of interest, right? That's where banks make their money. The interest rates on these cards are 20, 25, 30% or more. System feeds on this. Lower your score, higher the interest. The higher the interest, the harder it is to get ahead. Harder it is to get ahead, the more debt you carry. And the more debt you carry, the more profitable you become to them. This isn't a bug. This is the feature of the system. This is what they want. The system incentivizes profitable instability. If you try to escape it, right, let's say you want to rent instead of buy, or pay cash instead of borrow, right, or close your credit cards accounts altogether. Now the system calls you risky. Risky to who? It's certainly not you. You're trying to be responsible. You're trying to avoid interest and live within your means without running up debt. But to the banks, you're now harder to predict, right? You're harder to monetize for them. So they're going to penalize you, right? And it's not just loans, right? Your credit report and sometimes your score, we've already talked about this a little bit, right? It can affect direct things in your life, things you might not think about, your auto insurance, your rental applications, even the deposits you pay on utilities when you finally get to move into your new place, right? And even some employment applications, right? We already know in over a dozen states, employers can run credit checks on job candidates. They claim it's about responsibility, but think about it. What does a missed student loan payment have to do with your ability to stock shelves or teach kids or manage a shift? Nothing. Nothing at all. It's just another way the system turns private financial hardship into public judgment. So, let's not forget about the credit bureaus themselves, the Equifaxes, Experian, TransUnions of the world. They're private corporations. They're not part of the government, and they make billions selling your data. They collect your information, right? Most of the time without your permission. They sell it to banks, landlords, marketers, insurers. And when they make a mistake on your credit report, which happens all the time, by the way, a lot, it's the burden's on you to fix it. They profit off your debt, and they penalize, your effort. When they get it wrong, right, when they make a mistake, they leave you holding the bag. This isn't financial empowerment. It's financial exploitation. And it's happening to millions of Americans every single day, day in and day out. So the question is, what do we do about it? And what needs to change if we're ever going to have a fair, just, and transparent credit system in this country? Because, let's be clear. The system isn't just outdated. It's broken, and not in a small way. Right? It's broken at the foundation. We've already saw the building blocks it was built on. Right? They were skewed from the beginning. So, let's start with the basics. Roughly 1 in 4 Americans has at least one error on their credit report. That means tens of millions of people are being judged financially, professionally, and personally based on completely incorrect information. Right? A missed payment that was actually made. An account that doesn't actually even belong to them. A debt that was already paid off but never updated. And correcting these mistakes, man, if you've ever had to do it, it's a bureaucratic nightmare, right? You're told to contact the credit bureau, and then the lender. And then the lender says you need to contact the credit bureau. And credit bureau says go back. Meanwhile, your score is suffering, right? Your loan terms are getting worse. You might be denied getting a house or a job, all for something that was inaccurate that wasn't even your fault to begin with. So, let's talk about the people who don't have a score at all. Right? Roughly 26 million Americans are what the industry calls credit invisible. That means they don't have enough credit history to even generate a score. Another 19 million have records that are unscorable. Right? That's over 45 million people. And it's disproportionately lower income, young, Black, Latino, that are completely locked out of the credit economy. And why? Because they pay in cash, or they avoid debt, or there are renters who pay on time every month, but those payments aren't included in their score, unless of course you pay to have them report it. Right? That's right. You have to pay to get credit for being responsible. It's a system that already judges you for not borrowing enough. And then there's the hard inquiry trap, right? You apply for a car loan, your score dips. Apply for a mortgage, drops again. Just shopping around for a better interest rate can penalize you, even if you don't take the loan. You're punished just for asking the question. That's not financial logic, that's gatekeeping, right? The whole system is designed to keep power and profit with the lenders, not with the people who are trying to build better lives and be responsible. And let's not pretend these rules hit everyone the same, right? We know they don't. Even though it's now illegal to explicitly discriminate based on race or gender, algorithmic bias is still rampant. Studies have shown, right, that borrowers in majority black neighborhoods are more likely to receive some subprime loan offers, even when their credit scores and incomes are the same as white borrowers. And when credit scoring models are trained on decades of unequal data, what do we expect them to produce? More inequality, right? So what needs to change? Well, first we need real transparency, like real transparency. Credit scoring models, especially FICO, are proprietary. What's that mean? That means you can be denied a mortgage, charged a higher interest rate, or rejected from a job based on a secret formula you're not even allowed to see. That has to end, for starters. We need open, accountable models, just like we demand from other systems that affect our rights, right? We need to rethink what gets included. If you pay your rent on time every month, that should count, right? Your utility bills, your cell phone, your internet, all of it. If we're going to judge financial reliability and responsibility, let's accurately measure how people live, not just how they borrow money. We also need to stop penalizing people for rate shopping or avoiding debt. Credit inquiry shouldn't cost you. Closing a credit card you don't need shouldn't cost you. Paying off debt early shouldn't cost you. And finally, we need to treat credit as a public good, not a private weapon. That means exploring public credit registries, systems that operate under public oversight using transparent criteria, right? Free of profit motive. And that's what drives our system today, right? Is their profit motive. Because at the end of the day, credit should be about access and not exclusion. It should be about helping people move forward, not keeping them in place. What could be a better system? What would a better system look like, and how would we build it? So let's start with the big idea we had to start, right? Transparency. Let's start there. Right now, the formulas used to determine your score are locked behind closed doors, right? We've already talked about it. They're proprietary, right? They don't want us to know. It's a trade secret. They want us to know how we're being judged, right? We don't get to see the logic behind it. We don't get to see how the sausage is made. So that has to change, right? So a public credit scoring model, one that's open source and publicly accountable, would help level the playing field. No more mystery math. No more surprise penalties for trying to be financially responsible. Just a clear, understandable system built to reflect real life, not some banker's profit model, right? And then next we need data fairness, right? The current system ignores so many of the things regular people actually spend money on. We've talked about them: rent, utility bills, childcare, subscriptions, groceries, health insurance premiums. None of that counts, right, towards your credit score. Unless, of course, you fall behind and it gets reported as negative. But what if we flip that, right? What if we flip that over? What if on-time payments counted by default? Not just for the people who pay special services to have their rent reported to the credit bureaus, but counted for everybody. We could create a model that values how people actually live their lives, not just how they borrow that money. Because let's face it, borrowing money isn't the only indicator of financial reliability. In fact, for many people, avoiding debt is a smart move, right? So let's talk about access to credit. Right now, building credit often requires you to already have credit. It's a chicken and egg trap. But there are better solutions. Like, let's see, starter accounts. We've seen some of these start to kind of come out a little bit, right? Through trusted institutions that report positive history. But you have the opt-in for that alternative data that we talked about, the rent, the insurance, those type of things, right? Publicly backed small dollar lending options, right? To keep people away from those predatory payday lenders, right? And how about managing those payday lenders so that, they can't charge 400% APR and take advantage of somebody who is already in a vulnerable situation, you know? And what about fixing one of the most absurd parts is, having your credit run and that penalizing you for trying to get a lower interest rate. Shopping for a car loan or a mortgage shouldn't hurt your credit. You're trying to find the best deal you can. That's not risky behavior. That's being responsible. And how about shortening the penalty window for negative marks, right? 7 years? That's a long time, especially for things like a missed medical bill or student loan default for someone who's already, back on track living their lives, right? Their credit score should be allowed to reflect that change sooner, not almost a decade later, right? Because that's just going to keep them down even more. We should also ensure error correction is free, fast, and fair. If a credit bureau makes a mistake on your report, and again, it happens all the time, it should be their responsibility to fix it as quickly as possible, not left for you to chase down for months. There should be real consequences for credit agencies that fail to correct bad data. Right now, there aren't any. And finally, we need a culture shift, right? Right now, having a low score is, seen as some type of, moral failing, as if you're irresponsible, as if you don't care. But that's not how life works. Sometimes people fall behind because of layoffs or medical bills or divorce or death in the family. It could be a lot of reasons, A big one because wages haven't kept up with inflation for decades. Let's stop treating this 3-digit score like, a measure of somebody's character. It's not a measure of your character, right? It's a measure of how well someone has played the game. They never asked to play to begin with, with hidden rules and a stacked deck against them in which the house almost always wins. Doesn't have to stay this way, right? Even though the system really wants it to, right? Wall Street, the bankers, they like it just the way it is. But let's get something straight. A low credit score doesn't mean you're lazy. It doesn't mean you're irresponsible. It doesn't mean you failed. It just means you've been measured by a tool that was never built for people like you and me, right? It just wasn't. Because the credit system we live under today doesn't tell the whole story. Not even close. We've outlined that very clearly, right? It doesn't know how many jobs you're working. It doesn't at all. It doesn't know you've been caring for a sick parent or paying for your kid's medicine out of your pocket. That's super expensive, right? It doesn't care that healthcare costs are out of control. It doesn't know you're avoiding debt because, you saw your parents drown in debt, right? It doesn't know that you're doing the best you can with what you've got. It doesn't care about any of that. This system, let's call it what it is. It's a profit model dressed up like some kind of moral compass, right? It rewards you for going into debt and punishes you for playing it safe, right? It sells your data. It gatekeeps opportunity. And it does it all behind this curtain, right? With zero transparency, accountability, and most of the time without any consent from you. And somehow, you're supposed to feel bad for that? No. Truth is, this system has failed you far more than you ever failed it. And you're not alone, right? Millions and millions of Americans, good, hardworking people, are living in the shadow of a 3-digit number they didn't create and can barely influence. A number that can make or can take away a loan from you or a lease, We've been sold a lie that if we just work harder, budget better, hustle more, everything will work out. That's not how this game is designed. especially when wages haven't kept up with inflation. It's designed to favor the already wealthy, to reward those who already have access, and to keep everyone else jumping through hoops just to prove they deserve a fair shot to try to make it as well. Here's the thing, those systems can change, right? We've done it before. We've ended redlining, we've passed fair lending laws, we've forced companies to clean up their act. Even if we're still getting those cobwebs cleaned out, we've done things. We can build a credit system that reflects the real world, right? We can build one that people are judged by how they live and not by how much they owe. One where transparency, equity, and fairness are baked into the actual foundation instead of just a bunch of bias. One where trust isn't a number, it's a relationship. And maybe, just maybe, one where we stop measuring human worth by financial matrix at all. But till then, just remember, you are more than your score. You are more than your credit report. Right? You are more than what the system tries to say you are. You're a human being living in a world that hasn't yet figured out how to value that properly. But someday, with enough of us pushing back, maybe we'll figure out how to value people over profit. I want to thank you for listening to Evergreen Perspective. I'm Ben Chrisley. And if today's episode hit home for you, I hope you'll share it with your friends, your family, your community. Because this isn't just about credit. It's about dignity and access and what kind of country we want to live in and support. Until next time, take care of yourself. Take care of each other. See you next time.